Hello and welcome to Tech Takeaways, the podcast discussing big tech challenges in bite-sized chunks. I'm your host, Jason Fitzgerald, Chief Operating Officer for Gardner Systems, and I'm joined by my dynamic co-hosts, Gardner Systems CTO Paul Stringfellow.
Hi.
And Gardner Systems CEO Wayne Miller.
Hi.
And in today's episode, we're looking at cloud spend and cost optimization. So Wayne, what is cost optimization?
Microsoft 365 cost optimization is an analytical software that we can install. Well, not install. It sits inside your Microsoft 365 tenancy that will produce insights into how you're using the M365 environment. Some of the key things that we've seen over the past 3.5 months are licensing. Are you procuring and using the right licensing versus the applications that you want to run? And that has led to a number of takeaways based upon cost savings, looking at levers and new starters, people keeping it live, and then looking at kind of global admin, where do users log into. So there's a lot to this. I think it's a 24-page report. It's very, very insightful. But before we kind of go into it, I think the starting point should be is how easy is it to install, Paul?
Yeah, so and I think this is one of the values of it, and as you said, and actually just want to say, no wonder Jason's doing the introductions now, because that was way better than anything I did in the other episodes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. But I think this kind of thing around cost optimization, one of the challenges I think we're seeing a lot with our customers is, and just in general, people move to the cloud and then they get shocked by how much moving to the cloud costs. Yeah. But just going back to your point, where this is something that there's kind of two different areas of cost optimization that we look at, and today we're going to be talking very specifically around Microsoft 365 as opposed to kind of infrastructure and platform as a service with things like Azure, AWS, and GCP. So you asked me how easy is it to set up. I think one of the joys of this service that we've been able to offer to some of our customers is it's really easy to set up. It's a 5 to 10 minute. I mean, we can set it up if we have the right access to somebody's tenancy, but beyond that, it's a 5 to 10 minute job. We've got a set of instructions pre-built. Go into the tenancy, give a little bit of access to some of the services that the external software runs, and then it gets access to the tenancy. And then, actually, while we like to run these reports for a couple of weeks to kind of get a look at things like to get a broad view of actually the way that the tenancy runs and the type of the way that software licenses is run. Actually, once we're within an hour, the service can already look at historic data and start to give a pretty good idea of the way that people's software is running. So, quick answer to your question, dead easy to set up.
10 minutes. Okay, that's good. And then in terms of letting the report run for an hour or 3 weeks, I suppose we're only looking at the changes in the tenancy over a period of time to make some recommendations. So most of the information we've got same day, next day, and then it's just a case of scheduling time for us to sit down and read that information back for people. Now, you've sat through most of these between you guys. What's been the key kind of eye-openers that you've seen so far?
I think what's always fascinating with this kind of stuff is actually use the phrase insight, and it is getting insights, because I think so often people will move to cloud and then just kind of ignore it. And I think one of the challenges that we've often seen, particularly in that move to 365, is sometimes the thing at the beginning of the move to 365, which is, why am I doing this and what license do I need? And often people will go for what's commercially the most attractive license, as opposed to what's the right license to allow me to use the services that are going to be useful to my business. And I think that's the very first thing that we start to see. So there's a whole bunch of cost optimization capabilities around this, and we've seen everything from people who have got a real good handle on their licensing, maybe sometimes with luck rather than judgment, but maybe where there could be 5 to 10% savings. But we've also seen at the other end, people where they're overspending 50 to 60% in terms of licenses around 365.
Absolutely.
And what drives that overspend? The wrong licenses, and actually buying licenses for people who aren't using them. So, often we'll see that, and you talked before about why might we want to run this for an hour or 2 or 3 weeks. That 2 or 3 weeks gives us that insight. It gives us a broader and better insight into which users actually are logging onto the service and which ones aren't. So we get to see that, and we can get to see things like ads moves and changes. But, I think that idea of people not using licensing and people using the wrong licensing, that's hugely valuable even, and we can normally find that out within a couple of hours and to say, see significant savings in terms of either people who aren't there, who've just got licenses assigned to them, or, people using a big license where perhaps a smaller, less expensive license might be appropriate.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, I think that sometimes there's a lack of appreciation that actually you don't have to have the same M365 license across the board. You can mix and match depending on what features that particular user needs access to. So if you've got a user profile that says, this user doesn't need Office, this user doesn't need access to some of the premium features, we can actually put them on a lower license, a lower cost license. It's still perfectly suitable for that user because they get an advantage and, they're using a higher percentage of the features that you're paying for. And then for the kind of power users that do need the extra mailbox spaces and stuff like that, we can license them appropriately. So it's a case of kind of realizing that the usage within the environments. I mean, one of the things that stood out to me was where the number of environments where it was the same license across the board, but actually the feature adoption was quite low for some features. So when we look at, say, Intune, for example, Intune's a really powerful feature. We can do device management with it. We can drive security profiles through it. But it just wasn't used, but it was being paid for. And I think that a lot of this kind of comes from how the organizations adopted M365 at scale during lockdown. A lot of companies kind of adopted it almost overnight to keep the business operational, to get access to Teams, and never kind of went back and did that exercise around, are we licensing the correct users for the correct license? And are we getting the most out of the features that we've got access to? And is it secure? When you mentioned about global admins earlier.
I've seen, a lot of this is very new to me, but some of the readbacks that we've seen so far, we've seen 14 people with God access and they can do anything within their network. And the reason for kind of global, that was a device that needed setting up and we'd done it 2 years ago and we'd never looked at it. Now, for me, surely that's a way in for cyber criminals to kind of, if they get that access, they can penetrate that network. So just that highlight alone was some, takeaways where, IT directors have gone, right, I need to rectify that quickly.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, global access is global access. I'm not technical. That means they can do anything.
Global admin is the highest level of access you can have in the platform. You can do anything with that access. You can access other people's email addresses. You can change essentially fundamental options within the platform.
So why would people create global admin? Is this because a third-party device is needed just to get on the network?
Sometimes it's like people give domain administrator accounts left, right, and centre on-prem. And the reason they do that is because it's easy a lot of the time. And it's what, myself and Jason are techies, and I think we probably both admit to, we may have done this in the past, where you do that because it's the quick win. So let me do that and I will go and correct that later. And just later never comes. You never go and correct that later. But that kind of thing with global admins is a huge problem because, as Jason said, you run the risk. So somebody can go in with a global admin and delete your tenancy in Microsoft 365 or Azure.
Right,
And when they delete your tenancy in 365 and Azure, they delete your tenancy. It doesn't go to a wastebasket. There's no recover this option. You can't ring Microsoft up and say, any chance I can have my tenancy back? Because once they've stopped laughing at the other end when you've asked that question, they will just politely tell you, unfortunately not, Mr. Customer, you can't have your tenancy back. But Jason raised a really interesting point earlier on as well, because we talked about cost savings. One of the other areas that we see significant savings, because this report just kind of gives us insight into the way that you're using the licenses that you've got.
Yeah.
But actually, as Jason said, that underutilization of licenses not only can potentially give you access to other services, but it also can point out that you are paying for services that you're paying
This
other
is to
parties.
enable people to pay less, not pay more.
Yeah,
essentially.
and so taking Intune as an example, actually you've bought a bunch of licenses that gives you Intune access, and you've also got a mobile device management platform in place. Now, I'm not saying that you should rip that out and throw it away, but it becomes a consideration. Does Intune do the things that my other tool does? And if it does, could I phase that out over time and not only utilize this license I'm already paying for, but park at, reduce the spend. I tell you one area we're seeing this an awful lot is actually people where they've got the right licenses that gives them access to Microsoft Defender as an endpoint detection and response solution. We're seeing quite a lot of people start to shift away from seeing Defender as being plenty good enough for what they need and starting then to shift away from other third-party tools. So it's almost a double, it's kind of a double whammy almost, in that you are getting additional benefit from the license that you've bought, but you're also getting the opportunity to potentially reuse spend that you've done anywhere else. And if you can take reclaim budget from your IT spend, well, that allows you to do other projects. Other projects that we kind of started this talking about cost optimization. There's no business right now out there who doesn't want to be able to spend more efficiently, not necessarily spend less, but do more with the budget that they've got.
So another interesting fact coming out of the readbacks was policies, not the lack of policies, but we weren't seeing much policy adoption that was available. Could you expand on that, Paul?
So, I think one of the things that we see is this kind of use of, so one of the things the report gives us is access to the security of that tenant, and how well the security features inside of Microsoft 365 have been adopted. So users can see this themselves, actually, if they go into their admin console, they can see, the security console, they can see a thing called Secure Score. But actually what this report allows us to do is use that Secure Score information and also aggregate it with some other information to give kind of some broader insight into the way security has been adopted. And we've done lots of projects over the last 3-4 years. Actually, going back to something Jason was saying about people who rushed into adopting 365 because they had to. And they did it for all the right reasons. It's not a criticism, but actually now starting to go back and saying, am I secure in this in a way that I can? So that insight's really useful to look at, am I using all the capabilities available to me? And if I'm not, how can I utilize those to drive better security? But hey, that's a show in itself about driving better security.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think we're almost about to wrap up this episode. So I would just quickly whip round. Wayne, key takeaway?
It's not about spending less, it's about spending efficiently, as you've just pointed out. One of the other things was, sorry to kind of come back in, was where are your users? In a couple of the reports, we identified that there was users outside of the UK that people were like, why are they in Europe? Why are they in Asia? So that was really good. So yeah, I think, Secure Score, spending more efficiently, and just an insight into, are you, in some of them, someone had a Secure Score of 75, which is fantastic. Yeah. Someone had 98% utilization of the license. And so in some ways, it was a pat on the back to the IT team to take to the board to say, look at a great job I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot I can add to that. I think optimization is probably the thing I'd take away from it. This is not about necessarily just cost saving. This is about getting the best out of the investment that you've made. And I think, that's something that we're all looking for right now in, are we getting the best out of any investment we're making in terms of our IT budgets?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, my key takeaway from all of this, I think something that Wayne raised quite well earlier, go and check the amount of global admins you've got access to in your tenancy. If you've got more than 3, take a look at who's got access and try and narrow it down a little bit. It is God mode in the platform, so a lot of risk associated to that. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode. I've certainly enjoyed it. You enjoyed it?
I've enjoyed it.
I've had a great time.
Yeah. Great, awesome.
Now for the Peroni.
Peroni o'clock. Subscribe. We're available everywhere you get your podcasts from. Hit the subscribe button. We'll be looking to drop a new episode roughly about every 2 weeks. If there's any topics that you want us to pick up and bat around, get in touch. We're at podcasts@gardnersystems.co.uk. All our information is on gardnersystems.co.uk.